Welcome to Voices in the Wilderness, conversations about church and leader health. Thank you so much for listening. We encourage you to keep the conversation going. Voices in the Wilderness is brought to you by Preparing for Amazement Ministries, where we empower and equip churches and leaders to create lasting and transformational health. Visit amazed15.org to learn more. We also welcome any comments or suggestions. Simply email us at podcast@amazed15.org. My name is Marcus Carlson, and today, again, our guests are Jen Benford and Joe Oliver. Welcome, Joe and Jen.
Hey.
Hello, thank you.
Yeah, I'm getting used to all these J words in a row. I'm going to trip up one time and call, one of you something wrong. So
We have a friend group, Jen, her husband Jeff, Jane and Joe, me and my wife, and Jenny and Joel. Good luck with
So
that
I
group.
started calling it the J Squad,
the
and
J
we are.
Squad. Well,
And everybody needs a little more J Squad kind of love in their life. I'm just saying.
That's right.
So I would not count Jeff in that because his actual name is Saint Jeff. Just for the record.
That's what Marcus calls him. Yeah.
That's what I do
Side note.
regularly. Like,
he's a good
since
dude.
the day, even before I met him, I was calling him that. Fun facts.
He's a good dude.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's talk about
So we are continuing a series. We're doing a 10-part series on the habits of healthy leaders. And so we've started to dive into the habits. And so today we're jumping in on habit 2. Healthy leaders are teachable and lifelong learners. And so, again, these are kind of an order of significance to our best kind of effort and understanding. So excited to talk to the two of you about that. And I would say for me, of all the habits of healthy leaders, this may be the one that I'm most passionate about because I think that, that and the self-knowledge, I think for me as somebody who leads people, that if somebody's teachable, anything is possible. And so excited to hear your thoughts. So let's just dive in. For you, how would you define or describe what it means to be teachable and a lifelong learner as a leader? Because that could mean a bunch of different things to a bunch of different people.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's hard to quantify. So quite simply, when I think about being teachable and what that looks like as a lifelong learner, I think about someone's ability to stay curious.
Mm-hmm.
And so the moment you lose your curiosity, you're going to get stuck. And that, I think, is hard for in the context of ministry and pastors, because most pastors probably came out of a theological training that told them this is what we believe and this is how we believe it and this is how we do it. And that in and of itself creates a sense of we figured it out, and you lose curiosity. You stop asking questions. You stop looking around and going like, well, why is that? And how come this? And why not this? And so I think that is a hard thing for pastors and leaders to continue to cultivate, is the ability to ask questions. And asking questions is all about being curious. I think of when I had toddlers years ago, they're just, what's that? Why this? What, and you get frustrated as a parent sometimes. You're like, just because, leave me alone, but at the heart of that is something very beautiful that we lose as adults. And that's what I think kills the ability to be teachable, is because we lose an ability to be curious and ask questions.
I love that. And of course, instantly, seminary and theological education is about certainty, right? Although the more I learn about God, the more I have to embrace mystery. But anytime somebody talks about curiosity, I think of Ted Lasso, right? Get curious.
You have to.
Right. Yeah. And I think in the church world, it's easier to get judgmental than curious, or more natural, at least. Jen, what about you? How would you kind of define or describe what it means to be teachable and a lifelong learner as a leader?
Yeah, I would say teachable is a synonym for the character trait of humility, and also an acknowledgement of what the journey as a disciple or a follower of Jesus actually is that there is not one of us who has it all figured out not one of us that has arrived in all areas of all things. And so being teachable is a posture of learning and the acknowledgement that, hey, you leader, however old you are, 46, whatever, you you have pieces of you that are still very childlike in you, like emotional maturity or relational skills or whatever, or you have pieces of you that are still in adolescence, like how to relationally repair. That is a skill that most leaders in the church do not have. That skill, that is a adolescent skill that we ought to have learned, and we didn't, many of us. So, and there's parts of us that are still emerging adulthood, and just the recognition that in some regards you're the teacher and in some regards you're the learner, and that is a healthy culture of discipleship, of actually who we are as God's people, is growing and learning and pulling and pushing one another in the growth journey together. And you have to have, like, a teachable heart is a humble heart willing to grow. So, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, I do think some of us have learned those skills, but I think sometimes in the church we don't use them, and so we unlearn them. They're not
Yeah.
necessarily celebrated. Um, for the two of you, why is this important? Like, why do you see being teachable and a lifelong learner as being important for leader health or even leadership in general?
I think, like Jen, you hit it on the head as you talked about the synonym of teachable being humble. I think humility in positions of leadership is really important, and I think that the ability to be curious and to continue to learn, um, I think it breeds humility. Like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. I thought I had this figured out, and now all of a sudden I'm hearing an idea that's actually challenging that, and I don't know what to do with that, so I got to sit in that, which I think sometimes the byproduct of being in pastoral ministry in any capacity or in leadership, there can be a tendency to inflate an ego, because you have people coming to you, you have people seeking your advice, your wisdom, your thoughts, you're teaching people on certain subjects, and to remember, like Jen was saying, I don't know everything. And so that teachable spirit, that curiosity will breed in you an ability to stay humble, that I actually don't know it all. And one of the most empowering things a leader can say, um, is simply, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but I'm willing, if you're willing, to find the answer with you. I mean, that can be so empowering for a leader, and for someone who's hearing that, it's like, oh, okay, let's do that work together. So I think it's important because it breeds humility in a leader.
Awesome.
Yeah, and it breeds humility in the culture. So once again, like, if our mission as the people of God is to go and make disciples, we actually have to model what being a disciple is and model the character of a disciple. And that's the number one character is trait, is that you are a learner, you are a follower of Jesus. And once again, there is not one of us who has attained the full measure of Christ yet, as it talks about in Ephesians. Like, we are in process, you leader, however old you are. So if you want to go and make disciples, you have to model what that means and what that looks like. And humble posture is like the number one thing. Come, we're on a growth journey together. And we're all, again, teachers, and we're all learners, and we're all growing together, trying to figure out this crazy mess of life.
Yeah. Yeah, we never arrive. Sometimes I even just want to time out. Like, can I just stop growing for like a day or whatever? But I think it's also kind of a snowball. Like, once you really get on that journey of lifelong learning, I think it can become a posture, so much so that you can't turn it off. And even when you want to, which I think, sometimes, is often the case. And life is a great teacher, even if you're not trying. I mean, I learn something new every day without trying. It's just, am I going to absorb that, or am I going to reject that, or be, clueless to that is sometimes the question.
Yeah.
What kind of tips would you give people from your own experience, maybe your successes and your failures, of being teachable and being a lifelong learner?
Did you say what success is?
I said, what tips would you give
Oh,
people?
tips.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, for either from your successes or your failures, like what tips would you give people uh, to help them be more
Yeah.
teachable and embrace lifelong learning more
I
significantly?
would say one of the greatest things, like what's hanging right here above my computer, is actually what my values are, that I see are reflect a mature follower of Christ. And so I intentionally watch for who in my circle of influence has those character traits
Mm.
that I want. And I intentionally put myself near them. Like the J Squad, that they, like, on my birthday, it's not just happy birthday, it's Jen, what do we want for you as a human to be your best self? Those are the kinds of people that I want to be around. And so I intentionally am putting myself in spaces with people I want to be like. And that would be my greatest tips, is know what the values are that reflect who Christ is in the way that you're an expression of it. Watch for people who model that, because most of growing in a teachable, like most of it's caught.
Yeah,
Good.
absolutely. Great thoughts, Jen. Appreciate that. What about you, Joe? What tips would you give?
Yeah. I'll get maybe a little bit uh, practical in some things that I think are important. I wrote down a few of them here, but the thought I had is that time is the enemy of a growing and maturing pastor. Time is the enemy of a growing and maturing pastor. And I say that because as a minister, as a church leader, you will be pulled a million directions except for working on yourself.
Mm.
That's why I say time. So as a pastor, the goal is to make time for your own growing and learning. So how can you do that well? There are a few hacks I'll suggest. So if there's
Ooh,
a
hack.
book
I'm so
or
excited. Hacks. That's so exciting.
hacks, we're going to, yeah. So here's some hacks. If there's a book, there's an author that came out with a book that you like. Most likely, they are doing interviews where they talk about the book that they just wrote. Sometimes that's a great introduction to find out whether you want to actually dive in, because in any interview the author's going to give, they're going to give you the most important parts of the book. And from that point, you can actually hear the heart and the main message of that book, and you can get a lot from an interview, from a podcast. Don't worry about reading a book from cover to cover. Okay, sometimes we think we start a book, we got to finish a book. Listen, when you're learning and growing, when you get something meaty out of it, it's okay to go, I'm not going to finish the rest. So don't worry about reading it end to end. End a book early. So if there's something you started and you're just not jiving with it, just get rid of it. Like, put it aside. I've plenty of times I'm like, oh, I can't wait to read this book. And I'm like a quarter way into it. I'm like, I don't care. And so I just move on. You don't have to finish it. Audiobooks.
Very hard for me. Like, this is a triggering moment because I think I've read like 2,000 books and I've only done that twice, and I still feel that.
Okay, you have
I don't know.
permission, is what he's saying, Marcus. Get what you need from the author and move on.
Yeah, and it's okay. Audiobooks when you're working out are great resources. Obviously, podcasts. When I mow the lawn, I listen to audiobooks. When I'm doing house chores, I'm listening to an audiobook. So you get creative with your time. But just know that you're going to have to be intentional, and there are ways to get through content other than sitting down for 2 hours with a book in your hand, because for some ministers it's like, I just don't have that bandwidth. It's like, yeah, I get it. So there are ways around that. So I don't know, there are hacks.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I think for me, maximizing time is important. So whether I'm in an airplane or a car or whatever, how do I, if it's not phone meetings, like how do I, podcasts, ebooks, which again, got this huge library in my room here and I'm so used to, but I'm doing a lot of driving these days. And so it's huge. I think the teachability thing too, for me is like, again, it goes back to that curiosity, but also trying to learn new things. Um, for me, that's been really helpful because it's opened my brain, to different things, to different ideas that have nothing to do with the church world. Like I could go, learn something about geology or usually, like the things I learn about bourbon, right? Like that's my hobby thing, right? Like the things I learn about bourbon, like it's amazing to me that it opens different parts of my mind to experience different things. And to see different things, or even as you're like working with a different group. So this morning, I was doing a generational understanding seminar for a whole library staff, and for a county in the area, and it's like so. What I've been saying to myself as I prepare is, what do I need to understand about library staff and this work that they do, so that I can like better care for them. And so it's fascinating, as I was done with the seminar, I could talk about, okay, like here's how this matters to you, and here's how your work is important to this. And when we were done, I always check in, and the head of the library, I said, was that kind of what you were looking for? She's like, well, that exceeded it, because it was that contextualization of like
Yeah.
me coming from I'm the big speaker with the doctor name next to it, and instead I come in, ready to try to understand, what these folks are doing day to day in a world that for them is changing really fast. I think that's why this habit is really important. The world is changing really fast. This century is changing 200 times faster than last century, and which is a crazy stat to me, by the way. Like when I read that, I just kind of lost my mind a little bit. And so even in the pandemic, back in those days, that I kept using and hearing the word pivot to the point where I was kind of sick of it. But I do think there's a sense as leaders that we've got to be really nimble, which is, as I get older, is a little trickier. And so, we've got to pivot. Like we've got to constantly, and I think that when we have a teachable spirit, that helps us to pivot. I think when we look for chances to pivot, it helps us to, to have a teachable spirit. And I think in a world that's so defensive and so combative, inside and outside the church right now, and with no signs of improvement, and at least in my mind, I think this teachability thing becomes like a huge X factor. Like it's nothing that technology could ever do.
Yeah, I would add to what Joe was saying too about intentionality, that if you genuinely have a teachable spirit and teachable heart, and acknowledge that you, as a disciple of Christ, are on a growth journey, you will intentionally put yourself into transformative spaces.
Mhm.
So, like, I put myself in a space that's very uncomfortable with an Enneagram coach. I put myself in a space that's very uncomfortable with a counselor. I also put myself in spaces where I'm reading the word with other people and dialoguing and engaging with it, or a book study, or whatever it is based on how you're wired. Intentionally put yourself in spaces that will push you to grow. Otherwise, I mean, your growth journey could just be going like this because the Holy Spirit will always be at work. But if you're intentional, it'll be more like this.
Yeah. Yeah. It's actually funny you said that. I do the counselor thing monthly, and I had the appointment. That's the last thing I had before this. And I'm pretty sure in that hour, she told me I was not 25 anymore, like 32 times,
Mm-hmm.
because talking about limitations, right? And it's like, no, I don't want to have limitations. I never had limitations. I've always pushed through limitations. What are you talking about, right? And I think again, it's that, how do you have that posture of, is sometimes someone stating the obvious to you that you just refuse to
Like
like hear.
your hairspray right here, Marcus.
It's the light. You need to close the blind.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Sure.
the curtain is not open. It's time for a color. Yeah. No, I think, and I will say again, when I look at all the staff I've worked with, the ones that have been the most fun and the most effective are the ones that are most teachable, and the most miserable staffing experiences I've ever had, and the moments where I've had to kind of let people go or do very difficult things with people or help them transition, it's always because there's been no teachability. And we see that in a lot of churches we work with, right, Jen? Whether from, lay leaders or from pastors. Certainly, Joe, you've seen this in your time when people are not teachable. Uh, Eventually, you're going to hit something that can't be fixed, and that's when people get hurt. And that's when you start to have these kind of ugly transitions that keep me fairly busy these days. And so that teachability thing is huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amen.
Any other thoughts on this?
I mean, I think of if you're in a position of leadership, which is to say that you are someone with influence, the most insufferable people I've ever been around are people that lack humility, and the people that lack humility often are not teachable.
Yeah.
And so, if you're trying to lead people, you're going to really struggle to lead people when people don't want to be around you because you're just not teachable. You're not, you're not leading with a humble spirit. And people who are teachable oftentimes are more patient, are more forgiving. It's one of those things that I'm just thinking, like in a church setting where you're trying to model the way of discipleship for people. This is something that you want your people to embrace, and you yourself need to embrace it. And so if you want to be a healthy leader, that is, I mean, if that's not on your radar, you're probably not watching this
Right.
this little webinar. So
and there's very few people who even actually, okay, so maybe I'll say it this way, one of the fastest ways to notice a teachable, humble heart is to see a leader who messed up, whether it's in something little or big, and to be able to say, I was wrong. Will you forgive me? And it happened just a couple weeks ago to me. And I looked at that leader and I said, you are one of the very first people that I know who is a white male leader who is willing to say, hey, I didn't really do that in the best way I could have. Will you forgive me? And I will do better next time. And I looked at him and said, I trust you more. And I am more willing to follow you than I was yesterday because of what you just said. And it's the mark to me of humility when you recognize that I am still growing, I am still learning, I make mistakes, and will you forgive me? And let's roll into the next thing.
Yeah, I mean, we've with Patrick Lencioni's stuff on the ideal team player, he talks about humble, hungry, and smart. And so we've been testing an inventory, and so I took it, and I scored well on all of them, but they take you from the weakest one to the strongest one and give you some coaching. And so, my weakest one was humility. And I thought about, which made sense of those three for me. Like, you battled insecurity throughout my life. I'm a man, I'm a white man, like these are, not natural things. And so, but it was interesting because as I thought about, okay, like, how do you grow in humility without it being artificial or without screwing up a bunch, right? Because that's where most of my humility has come from, is failure. And I think, one of the things you said, Jen, really struck me, like, apologize frequently. That's a great way to grow in humility and teachability. Apologize frequently, right? Think about yourself less. That is a really easy way to grow in humility as well. And none of us love apologizing, but I think it's at the core of what the Christian life is about. It's at the core of what Jesus has done for us. And
certainly, and it'll stretch you and make you grow.
Yeah.
And it's uncomfortable.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like, and that's never been good. Like, you never want to fail somebody or hurt somebody. And if you do, well, you don't really belong in ministry anyway. So it's a different podcast. But, I do think that those two things are connected deeply. Humility and teachability. So yeah, what a great conversation. Appreciate you guys so much as we kind of dive in to these habits. And so this was habit 2. Healthy leaders are teachable and lifelong learners. And so look forward to kind of continuing the conversation in future habits and future episodes.
Love it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. Again, we encourage you to keep the conversations going. Voices in the Wilderness is brought to you by Preparing for Amazement Ministries, where we empower and equip churches and leaders to create lasting and transformational health. Visit amazed15.org to learn more. We welcome any comments or suggestions. Simply email us at podcast@amazed15.org. And especially in this series, as we work on material for the website and the book, we welcome your feedback. And we thank you so much for listening.